Part 1. The Final Secret. The hospital was too quiet. Only the faint hum of machines and the distant murmur of rain against the window dared to break the stillness. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, mingled with the subtle sweetness of lavender from a small sachet Lena insisted on keeping by her bedside. Adrian Cole sat in the narrow chair beside her bed, his tall frame hunched, fingers interlaced over hers. Her skin was cool, almost translucent, the veins like fine threads of sapphire beneath the pale surface. Every shallow rise and fall of her chest seemed measured, fragile, as if a gust of wind could carry her away. Adrian's eyes followed the rhythm, trying to memorize it, to imprint every detail of her face, the soft line of her jaw, the faint freckles across her nose, the way her eyelashes curled even in sleep. Memories of their shared years flashed unbidden, her laugh echoing across a sunlit park, her hand brushing against his in the quiet of their apartment, the way she would tilt her head and look at him with that knowing, dangerous spark in her eyes. And now, none of it mattered. She was slipping further from him with every heartbeat. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the beeping machines. He leaned closer, straining to hear. Promise me you'll love her." His chest tightened, the words catching in his throat. "Who?" he asked, voice rough, as if it had been buried under months of denial and sorrow. She coughed, the sound wet and ragged, and her hand trembled under his. "Grace. She's important," Lena gasped. Her eyes, usually so fierce and commanding, softened with a plea, almost maternal, almost fearful. Fear of what? Adrian couldn't yet know. Fear of losing him, perhaps. Fear of leaving things unresolved. The machines around them seemed to amplify the silence after her words, each beep marking the cruel passage of time. Adrian's mind was a storm, confusion, pain, anger, grief, all colliding with the steady surge of his love for her. And beneath it all, an uneasy suspicion that there were truths he had yet to uncover. By the next morning, Lena was gone. The sun rose through a sky smeared with gray clouds, illuminating the sterile hospital room that now felt impossibly empty. Adrian sat in silence, staring at her still form, unwilling to move, unwilling to let the reality sink in. A single envelope lay on the table, her handwriting elegant, precise, and undeniably hers. He reached for it, fingers trembling, and paused. Some part of him wanted to leave it unopened, some part desperate to hold on to her final message. But curiosity and grief won. The letter contained fragments of her thoughts, cryptic, fragmented, and full of warnings. Mentions of a girl named Grace, mentions of family secrets and connections that Adrian did not yet understand. Lena had always been a planner, meticulous in every detail of her life. And now, even in death, she was orchestrating something pulling strings he could not yet see. Weeks passed. The media descended like vultures. Paparazzi photos of Adrian outside the hospital, alone and sullen, were splashed across every tabloid. Rumors swirled. Grief, betrayal, scandals fabricated and distorted. And in the midst of it all, Grace Bennett appeared, seemingly by accident, at a charity gala that Adrian attended reluctantly. He didn't recognize her at first. Her hair was lighter than he remembered from a fleeting memory Lena had once mentioned, her posture more assured, more deliberate. But there was something in her eyes that pulled at a fragment of recognition, a spark of familiarity that made his chest tighten in ways he didn't yet understand. Grace, unaware of her connection to Lena or to Adrian, found herself drawn into the orbit of a man who was intense, quiet, and enigmatic. She had always been cautious with strangers, with men, with people who claimed to care. But Adrian carried a weight, a vulnerability beneath the controlled exterior, that called to her own hidden longing for connection. Their first encounter was subtle, almost mundane, a collision of worlds at a crowded gala. Adrian spilled a drink onto his pristine suit, and Grace, passing by, helped him with a napkin. Their eyes met. Recognition or coincidence? Neither could say. There was an electric pause, a tension in the air, a quiet moment that stretched too long. And then, just as quickly, the crowd swallowed them again, and they were separated, left with the memory of a fleeting connection neither fully understood. But fate, as Lena had always insisted, had its ways of converging paths. Over the next few days, Adrian found himself seeing Grace more often, at charity events, at bookshops Lena had frequented, at the park where he would take long, contemplative walks. And Grace, in turn, could not escape the sense that someone was watching her, that someone knew more than she realized. Ava Winters, Lena's closest friend, became the first source of truth. She was blunt, sharp, and unnervingly perceptive. Adrian sought her out, hoping she could fill the gaps Lena had left behind. The cafe where they met was dimly lit, the soft murmur of other patrons providing a buffer for their private conversation. Ava's eyes, dark and knowing, held him in place before she even spoke. She knew about Grace, Ava said simply. No preamble, no caution. Just the truth, heavy and unavoidable. Adrian froze. What do you mean? His voice was low, controlled, but inside, something fragile was breaking. She knew she was your half-sister. Or, not half, but connected. She planned everything, Adrian. She wanted you to choose, even if it hurt everyone along the way. The words felt like ice in his veins. Adrian sat back, trying to process the layers of manipulation, love, fear, and strategy that Lena had woven, even as she lay dying. Why? He whispered. Why would she do that? Fear, Ava said. Fear of losing you. Fear of leaving you alone. Fear that, if she didn't orchestrate it, everything you loved would crumble. The conversation spiraled into fragments of confession, revelation, and lingering uncertainty. Each revelation about Lena's intentions, each detail about Grace's hidden place in this web, intensified the storm inside Adrian. He wanted to protect Grace, but he didn't know how. He wanted to hate Lena for the manipulations, but he couldn't. Her motivations were rooted in love, twisted and desperate, but love nonetheless. Grace, meanwhile, was experiencing her own confusion. A quiet, persistent unease had begun to seep into her life. Small coincidences, the bookstore visit, the park bench, the charity gala made her heart skip, made her wonder whether life had played some cruel trick. The media storm only added to the pressure. Every whispered conversation, every sideways glance felt like it carried judgment, speculation, and secrets that she could not yet decipher. One evening, as rain poured against the windows of Adrian's apartment, he found himself staring at the letter Lena had left. It was still sealed. He had not read it fully, had not yet dared. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that opening it would unravel more than he was ready to face. The letter symbolized everything he had lost, everything he had yet to understand. It represented Lena's final act of control, and yet, it also held the key to something far greater. The truth about Grace, the truth about love, and the truth about himself. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within him. Thunder rattled the windows, and he felt a visceral ache, a longing for clarity, for certainty, for the comfort of resolution that might never come. He wondered if Grace sensed the storm as well. If she felt the invisible threads that connected them, pulled by Lena's manipulations, pulled by fate itself. And then, as if summoned by his thoughts, Grace appeared on his doorstep. She had heard, through coincidence or intent, that he was still in the city, still struggling, still alone. Her eyes were wide, wary, and searching. Adrian, she asked softly, her voice almost drowned by the rain, but not by the intensity of the moment. Adrian's chest tightened. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "Grace, there's so much you don't know." "And there's so much I need to understand," she replied. The tension between them was palpable. Every word, every pause, every glance carried unspoken questions and unspoken truths. Ava's earlier warning echoed in Adrian's mind. Lena had planned this. Every encounter, every coincidence, every shadow of her presence had been carefully orchestrated. And now, standing in front of him, Grace represented both the past he couldn't escape and the future he couldn't yet grasp. The rain poured harder. They were drenched, yet neither moved to leave. In that suspended moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only Adrian, only Grace, and the heavy weight of secrets waiting to be uncovered. "Promise me you'll be careful," Adrian finally whispered, echoing the words he had heard from Lena's lips in her final hours. Not careful in life, but careful in love, careful in heart, careful in choices that could shatter lives. Grace nodded, but she could not yet understand. Grace nodded, but she could not yet understand. She could not yet see the depth of the web Lena had spun, the care and fear that had driven every action. But she felt it, faintly, like a tremor before an earthquake. As the night deepened, Adrian handed her a towel, offered a quiet place to sit, and for the first time in weeks, allowed himself to breathe, just a little. But beneath the temporary calm, the storm of revelations, desires, and unspoken connections was gathering strength, promising that nothing in their world would ever be simple again. Somewhere, in the darkness of a nearby room, an envelope sat unopened. Lena's handwriting glinted in the dim light. It was a promise, a warning, a final wish, and it would change everything. The letter remained on the table, unopened and unread, a symbol of fate, secrets, and the emotional journey about to unfold. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, signaling that the first chapter of their intertwined destinies was only just beginning. Part 2. Unraveling Truths. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Lena's apartment, casting soft gold streaks across the living room. Grace moved slowly, her hands running over the familiar furniture. The echoes of laughter and conversation that had once filled the space now absent, replaced by a profound silence. She had been sorting through Lena's things for hours, each object pulling her into memories she barely understood. 2 days later, Adrian appeared at the apartment. Grace had almost forgotten how he moved quietly, deliberately, as if trying not to disrupt the fragile balance she had built around herself. He carried a small tray with 2 cups. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the room. "Not tea," he said, handing her a cup. "You'd never drink it. Coffee, 2 sugars, no cream." Grace froze, startled. "How did you—" He shrugged softly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You muttered it at the gala. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did." The way he remembered, even the smallest details, unnerved her. She stared at him, feeling a flutter of something she couldn't name, a warmth that traveled from her chest to her fingertips. For the first time, she realized Adrian didn't just see her, he noticed her. Days passed slowly after that. Each morning, Grace found herself glancing at her phone, half expecting a message from him. And each evening, she wondered whether she would see him again. 3 days later, he returned. This time, with a small notebook tucked under his arm. "I thought you might like this," he said, placing it gently on the table. A journal Lena kept. Some of her thoughts, her plans. It might help. Grace hesitated. She wanted to refuse, to protect herself from the weight of the past, but something in his gaze made her relent. "Thank you," she whispered. In the quiet that followed, neither spoke. The apartment felt less empty with him there, less intimidating. She realized, with a pang of confusion, that she had begun to rely on his presence, not for answers, but simply for steadiness. A week later, they found themselves in the library, sorting through Lena's letters and photographs. Grace held a small envelope, its edges worn. She looked up at Adrian, who was kneeling beside a box of old journals, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder if she left these for us to understand her?" Grace asked softly, breaking the silence. Adrian nodded. "I think she did, but she also knew we'd have to find our own path eventually. These are just guides, not rules." He looked at her, his eyes lingering in a way that made her stomach tighten. It wasn't just Lena's memory he seemed invested in, it was her. The realization hit her slowly, like the first rays of sun over the horizon. 2 weeks later, they went through Lena's garden together. Grace walked slowly along the paths, her fingers brushing over petals still wet from morning dew. Adrian followed silently, a respectful distance between them, giving her space, yet never leaving her side. "She loved this garden," he said finally, breaking the soft hum of early morning birdsong. "Said flowers teach patience. They wither, bloom again." Grace's eyes softened. "She left me nothing but questions. Sometimes I wonder if I was just her unfinished secret." Adrian's gaze met hers, steady and sincere. "You're not unfinished. You're the only thing that makes sense in all this." For a long moment, Grace said nothing. She wanted to reject his words, to deny the stirrings in her heart, but she turned away, shaken. He didn't press. He simply walked beside her, letting the quiet between them speak. That evening, she realized she had smiled without reason for the first time in weeks. Another week passed. Media inquiries had started to trickle in questions about Lena's legacy, the will, the family's intentions. Adrian and Grace navigated each one together, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with quiet understanding. Grace noticed the way Adrian's hand would brush hers when they moved from one room to another, the subtle warmth that lingered long after contact. Each touch, small and unintentional, was an affirmation of presence, of connection. 3 weeks after Lena's passing, Adrian invited Grace to a gallery showing, a modest event showcasing pieces Lena had curated in her final days. Grace hesitated, but he simply smiled. "You don't have to understand everything tonight. Just come with me." The gallery was dimly lit, filled with muted voices and soft music. They moved through it together, observing Lena's selections, admiring the thoughtfulness behind each piece. Adrian lingered beside her, not hovering, but close enough that she felt the gravity of his attention. At one particular painting, a seascape tinged with shades of storm and calm, Grace spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She always loved this kind of light, so much movement, yet stillness at the same time. Adrian nodded, his eyes not on the painting but on her. She saw more than the canvas, didn't she? She saw people. The spaces between moments, the things that mattered quietly. Grace turned toward him, catching his gaze, feeling an inexplicable pull. "And you? Do you see me? The quiet things?" His smile was hesitant, the first vulnerability she had witnessed. "I think I've been trying to see you for a long time now." That night, walking home through the empty streets, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, Grace felt something shift. It was subtle an awareness of him, not just as a presence tied to Lena, but as someone who mattered, someone whose world she wanted to be part of. Weeks turned into a month. Adrian remained careful, patient. He never forced conversation about feelings or the future. Instead, he shared meals, stories, small silences that somehow conveyed more than words could. Grace found herself anticipating those moments, the warmth of his hand on hers when he passed her a dish, the way he remembered the books she liked, the teas she never drank, and gradually, she began to notice the spaces he left for her, the patience in his eyes, the sincerity in every gesture. She couldn't deny the pull, the magnetic tension that had grown so quietly yet insistently. 6 weeks after Lena's death, the two of them sat together in the garden at dusk. The sky was painted in orange and lavender streaks, the world hushed around them. Adrian turned toward her, voice low, gentle. "Grace, I need to tell you something. I didn't realize how much you—" She raised a hand, stopping him, heart pounding. "I know," she whispered. He blinked, surprised. "You do?" She nodded. "I feel it too. But we don't have to rush. We've been pulled into enough chaos already. We can feel it slowly." A small, genuine smile tugged at his lips. "Slowly," he agreed. And in that word, there was promise of time, patience, and the possibility of something real, something grounded in understanding and respect. The days after that passed with subtle, quiet intimacy, shared coffees in the mornings, long walks through Lena's favorite paths, evenings spent sorting letters, photographs, and memories. The world continued outside, busy and oblivious, but within the safe orbit of each other, they began to build a rhythm. Part 3. The Chase. 2 weeks after the gallery evening, the city had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal again. Rain drizzled intermittently, casting a soft silver sheen over the streets. Grace found herself walking through Lena's garden once more, hands tracing petals glistening with moisture, her thoughts tangled between memories of the past and the quiet stirrings of something she could not yet name. Adrian arrived without announcement, a gentle presence that had become a familiar anchor in her days. He carried 2 umbrellas, one for each of them, though neither seemed to care much for keeping dry. "Why are we always in the rain?" Grace asked, half teasing, half serious, though her lips curved into a reluctant smile. "Maybe because rain makes us pay attention," he said softly. "It makes everything small, careful gestures matter more." The garden was quiet, except for the soft patter of droplets, a private world they shared, untouched by the chaos of Lena's legacy or the curiosity of others. In that moment, Grace realized that Adrian's presence was no longer just comfort. It was becoming something more. The thought startled her. She blinked away the sudden warmth rising in her chest, pretending to examine a rose. 3 days later, Adrian sent her a message, an innocuous line. "Meet me by the fountain tomorrow morning. I think you'll like what I found." Grace hesitated before replying. She wanted to resist, to protect herself from the pull she felt. But curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, won. She arrived the next morning to find Adrian crouched beside a box of old letters and photographs, carefully sorted. His brow furrowed in concentration. "These are hers," he said quietly. "Some of the letters she wrote but never sent. I thought you might want to read them." Grace picked one up, hesitating. "And you've read them already?" He nodded. "I read some, but only to help understand her intention, not to interfere. You have to see them yourself." The trust in his eyes, the patience in his voice, stirred a new layer of connection. She realized, with a flicker of awareness, that her heart had begun to notice him in ways it hadn't before, not as a caretaker of Lena's wishes, but as Adrian himself, present and attentive. A week passed. They met daily in the apartment, sorting through letters, journals, and photographs. Each day, Adrian's gestures became more intentional, yet never overbearing. He remembered which cup of tea she liked even if she didn't drink it, and which streets she preferred to walk on, which books she had lingered over the most. These small attentions, imperceptible to anyone else, began to root themselves in Grace's consciousness. 2 weeks later, she invited him to lunch at a quiet cafe Lena had loved. They sat side by side, neither touching the other but both aware of the unspoken connection. "Do you ever wonder if she wanted this?" Grace asked, stirring her tea slowly. "Do I ever wonder if she wanted what?" "This? Us. If she imagined that after she was gone, we'd find some sense of peace, maybe even connection?" Her voice trailed off, fragile and tentative. Adrian's hand brushed hers, light as air. "I think she trusted us to figure that out ourselves, but maybe she hoped." The word maybe hung in the air, charged and deliberate. Grace felt a flutter in her chest she could not deny. The first tentative acknowledgement that her feelings were shifting. 3 weeks later, they walked through the garden as dusk painted the sky in shades of rose and lavender. Adrian's voice was low, measured. "Grace, I've been trying to say this for a while, but I can't just wait any longer. Lena, she trusted me with her last wish, but it's not only about her, it's about us, about how we feel, what we might become together. Grace turned toward him, heart hammering. "You don't have to say it," she whispered. "But I do," he insisted, stepping closer. "Because I can't pretend anymore. I don't just care about fulfilling her wish. I care about you. Truly, entirely." Her chest tightened. She wanted to look away, to deny, but her eyes stayed fixed on his. The truth was undeniable. She had felt it growing over weeks, his patience, his attentiveness, the quiet understanding that always seemed to be there when she needed it most. "Adrian," she began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," he replied softly. "Just let me be here. Let us figure it out together, slowly." That night, Grace lay awake in her apartment, replaying the garden scene in her mind. Weeks of small gestures, of shared silences, of tender moments, now converged into one undeniable conclusion. She was drawn to him, not by obligation, not by Lena's wishes, but by the depth of who he was, and the thought both exhilarated and terrified her. 2 days later, Adrian came to visit, carrying a bouquet of lilies, Lena's favorite. "I thought these might make the room feel lighter," he said, placing them carefully on the table. Grace smiled faintly. "They do. Thank you." As she watched him move around the apartment, rearranging photographs, straightening letters, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself before. Longing. Not for Lena, not for the past, but for Adrian. For this moment. For him. The following week, the media started to take notice. Rumors circulated about Lena's legacy, the mysterious young woman connected to Adrian. Grace felt herself recoiling from the attention, but Adrian remained a steady presence at her side. "We face it together," he said one evening as they sorted through a stack of unanswered inquiries. We're not alone, and we're not lost. Not if we stay here, in this moment with each other. Grace looked at him. The weight of weeks of quiet observation, shared grief, and tentative connection pressing against her chest. Slowly, imperceptibly, she realized she was no longer merely accepting his presence. She wanted it, needed it. A month after Lena's passing, Adrian finally invited Grace to meet him at the train station, not for departure, but for a walk along the platforms. The metallic clang of the train doors, the faint chatter of commuters, the smell of rain-soaked steel, all created a stage for what had been silently building for 6 weeks. Adrian's hand brushed hers as they walked, tentative, careful, charged with unspoken intent. Grace, he murmured, voice low. I need to know that you feel this too, that what we're feeling isn't only in my mind. Her eyes met his, the hesitation, the fear, the longing, and the spark of hope all mingled there. I do, she admitted softly. I can't pretend anymore. The months of shared grief, quiet moments, and subtle connection had coalesced into this moment. The love between them wasn't instantaneous. It had grown like the flowers in Lena's garden patiently, through care, attention, and trust. It was real. It was fragile. But it was theirs. The platform was deserted. The city hushed, and Adrian finally took her hand fully into his. Their fingers intertwined naturally, comfortably. No words were needed. The weeks of slowly building connection had already spoken for them. The first step toward confession had been taken weeks ago. But this was the culmination. Two hearts, wounded and careful, beginning to trust and reach toward each other fully. The storm outside had long since passed, leaving only the soft echo of rain in puddles on the tracks. The city would continue to move, indifferent to their quiet moment. But Adrian and Grace stood suspended, tethered by shared history, growing affection, and the subtle, steady promise of something real. And in that suspended moment, neither rushed. The love was not hurried, it had been earned. Week by week, day by day, they would take the next step slowly, but together, anchored in trust, understanding, and the soft afterglow of Lena's guiding presence. Part 4. Choosing each other. It had been 6 weeks since Adrian and Grace stood together on the train platform, hands intertwined, silently acknowledging the connection that had been carefully cultivated over weeks of shared grief, reflection, and cautious trust. Life had slowly resumed its ordinary rhythm, but for the two of them, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every glance, every brush of a hand, carried the weight of what they had endured and what they were beginning to feel for each other. 2 days later, Adrian invited Grace to his apartment under the pretense of sorting through more of Lena's letters and belongings. The city was quiet, the rain having retreated to a soft drizzle, leaving the streets shimmering under streetlights. Grace entered, carrying a small box of letters she had found tucked away in her apartment. She noticed Adrian was unusually tense, pacing the room, and a flutter of unease mixed with anticipation settled in her chest. Grace, he began, stopping mid-step. His voice was low, measured, and firm. We need to talk. Not about Lena this time. About us. Grace froze. Her fingers tightened around the box of letters. She had been expecting conversations about Lena, about their shared memories, but this felt like uncharted territory. This is insane, she said finally, frustration and vulnerability lacing her voice. She tied me to you like some ribbon around a gift. Do you understand how twisted that is? Adrian's eyes softened, his hands resting loosely at his sides. Do you think I asked for this? He replied quietly. I've been fighting it since the first moment I saw you. Fighting? Because every time I let my guard down, every time I look at you, I don't see Lena. I see you. The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Grace's heart thumped in her chest, torn between fury and the pull she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She wanted to retreat, to defend herself from this vulnerability, but something in his gaze rooted her to the spot. 3 days later, they met at the small park Lena had adored. The morning light glimmered off puddles left by a brief shower, and birds chirped softly, their song a quiet counterpoint to the tension that had been slowly building. I've been thinking, Adrian said, voice low, almost hesitant. We've spent weeks, almost 2 months navigating her past, her wishes, her plans, and now I realize something. What we feel, it doesn't belong to her. It's ours, and I don't want to wait any longer. Grace's breath caught. The realization that weeks of subtle gestures, shared silences, and careful conversations had been leading to this moment struck her with the force of a quiet revelation. You mean us? She asked softly, barely above a whisper. Yes, you and me, he confirmed, stepping closer. And I don't want to pretend anymore. I want this. I want you. Her hands trembled, but she didn't step back. Instead, she allowed herself to absorb the weight of the moment. The culmination of 6 weeks of gradual trust, tentative feelings, and the slow realization that they had both been drawn to each other, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. 1 week later, they returned to Adrian's apartment to revisit Lena's collection of letters one last time. The rain had returned, a soft patter against the windows, mirroring the tumult of their emotions. Grace held the final unread letter in her hands, the envelope still pristine. You don't have to open it, Adrian said, reading her hesitation. It's hers, but we don't need it to decide. Us. Grace nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. We don't, she whispered. We've made our choice, together. The following morning, they walked through the city streets, sunlight glimmering off wet pavement. Each step was measured, deliberate, a quiet assertion of their autonomy. They passed familiar cafes, the bookstore where Lena had subtly nudged them together, and finally, a small garden where roses bloomed under the early light. Adrian paused beside the fountain, turning to face Grace. I don't want to wait anymore, he said, voice steady but tender. I don't want to pretend we can't choose each other, even with everything that's happened. Lena, she gave us a chance, but it's up to us to take it. Grace looked into his eyes, searching, weighing, feeling the full depth of weeks spent observing, sharing, and understanding each other. Finally, she exhaled, the tension breaking. I want us, she said, voice trembling but true. I want this. I want you. Adrian smiled, relief and affection mingling across his face. He pulled her into an embrace, warmth radiating through both of them. The city, the rain, the chaos, all faded into insignificance. For the first time, they were free to exist in the moment, anchored only in each other. 3 days later, Ava appeared at the edge of the park, a silent witness to their quiet triumph. You did it, she said softly, voice carrying the weight of relief and validation. You both chose, well, Lena would be proud. We did it together, he said simply. In that statement was the acknowledgement that they were not just participants in Lena's final orchestration, they were authors of their own story now. Weeks rolled into a month. Life resumed, ordinary yet colored by the extraordinary depth of what had been chosen. They walked, laughed, and shared small confessions. Each interaction, each gesture, was a careful step in nurturing the love that had grown slowly, organically, over weeks. Finally, they returned to Grace's apartment one late afternoon. Sunlight spilled through the windows, highlighting the letters still unopened on the table. Grace reached for the final letter, turning it over in her hands. After a long pause, she deliberately placed it back down. No, she said softly, looking at Adrian. We don't need it. We don't need the past to define us. We've made our choice. Together. That's enough. Adrian nodded, a smile spreading across his face. It is enough, he agreed. And it will always be enough. Evenings were spent in quiet, ordinary moments, coffee in hand in hand, laughter shared over small jokes, and long walks in the park. Each moment reinforced the choice they had made, the love they had nurtured, and the trust they had built over realistic, deliberate weeks. As the days became weeks, Adrian and Grace understood something crucial. Love, when developed slowly and authentically, carried more weight and depth than passion that burned quickly. Their connection was real because it had grown through shared experiences, vulnerability, and mutual understanding. The final scene unfolded one golden evening. They paused on the quiet street corner where their story had first begun in earnest, hands intertwined, eyes locked. Adrian brushed a strand of hair from Grace's face. Whatever comes next, he said, voice firm but tender. We face it together. No shadows, no secrets, just us. Grace nodded, fingertips brushing his cheek. Just us, she echoed. And the story will write from here. The camera pulled back, showing them framed against the city bathed in sunset hues. The last unread letter resting quietly on the table, a symbol of Lena's enduring influence, but ultimately unnecessary. Adrian and Grace had chosen each other. They walked away, side by side, hearts aligned. The city stretched before them, full of uncertainty, possibility, and promise. Every future challenge would be theirs to face. But now they faced it united, their love forged in patience, trust, and the careful unfolding of shared lives. To summarize this story, it began with Lena's passing, a woman whose final wish bound together Adrian, her grieving fiancé, and Grace, her closest friend. What started as shared mourning slowly turned into a journey of letters, hidden truths, and painful questions about loyalty, love, and destiny. Along the way, Adrian and Grace confronted guilt, suspicion, and the fear that their growing connection was nothing more than Lena's manipulation. Yet over time, they discovered that what they felt wasn't about her, it was about them. And in the end, after weeks of doubt, reflection, and quiet moments, they chose each other. Not as replacements for the past, but as authors of their own story. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe my channel for more dramatic, intense romances. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for watching. I can't wait to share the next story with you.